But terminate what? Apart from the fact, of course, that there's a termination of a life, you're not going to terminate the sorrow, the grief, and the ongoing ramifications of that decision.
So we have with us today the Honourable Nick Goiran, the Shadow Minister for Child Protection. Thank you, Nick, for taking the time to talk to us today. Could you just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Dylan. It's my 11th anniversary in Parliament next week, and prior to serving in Parliament, I was a lawyer in Western Australia, practicing in civil litigation, and it continues to be a great honour to serve the people of Western Australia in the Parliament, currently in my capacity as Shadow Minister for Child Protection, Prevention of Family and Domestic Violence, and Shadow Minister for Commerce.
In light of the postponement of the Rally for Life, we thought we'd pose some questions to you on behalf of various pro-life youth in Western Australia. So we thought we'd just begin with, for you, what does it mean to be pro-life?
Yeah, it's a real shame that the Rally for Life hasn't been able to be held this year, but we understand that that is necessary because of the restrictions due to COVID-19 and the coronavirus. It's a real shame because as a pro-life Member of Parliament, it's a great support to see all of these people attending every year, literally in their hundreds up to thousands attending the annual Rally for Life. So to not be able to see that this year is a real shame. But great that we've got this opportunity to give people an update. And for me, being a pro-life Member of Parliament is fundamental to why I'm in the Parliament in the first place. And it goes to the very essence of our democracy, public health policy in particular. And it is a position that Members of Parliament need to have a position on. You're either pro-life or you're not. To have a position different to that will fundamentally change how you'll decide pieces of legislation.
You talked about how many people have attended the Rally for Life over the last 21 years, in fact, since 1998. What is the value of holding an annual rally, and why is it a disappointment this year that it can't go on?
Yeah, it probably can feel for people who have attended on many occasions, maybe at times pointless, because it might feel like nothing changes. But it is crucial to persevere in this fight. There will never be any change if people can't come out at least once a year to rally before Parliament. It's a great message to the Members of Parliament. It is usually the largest rally that is held at Parliament every year, and it is always the most respectful. And the combination of those two things are a really powerful message and witness to Members of Parliament.
Nick, could you please explain to us the issues of babies born alive that people may not be aware about? And I understand you've written a letter to the coroner on the issue and you have a response. Could you also please explain that to us?
Yeah, thanks, Warwick. It's a really distressing issue. So in my first term in the West Australian Parliament, I did some investigation into late-term abortions in Western Australia, and that investigation uncovered that there are multiple instances every year of babies who survive an abortion. And in one sense, it is wonderful to think that a baby has survived an abortion, but the real sadness in Western Australia is the sheer number of these babies who are then left to die. And this has been a long-standing fight from me and many people in the pro-life community. And it ultimately manifested itself in 2018 in a concession by the government that these deaths are reportable deaths, that it was wrong that they were not reported to the coroner, and that any Western Australian was authorised under law to report these deaths to the coroner, which I proceeded to do the very next day. Since then, I've been following up the coroner's office for an update regularly, and in fact, Warwick, I'm pleased to say that just last month I received this letter from the Coroner's Court of Western Australia. I'll be happy to provide it to you and members of the Coalition to the Defence for Human Life. And it appears to be encouraging. It says that the Coroner's Court has made recommendations to amend the Health Miscellaneous Provisions Act of 1911, which are under consideration. I've asked the Coroner's Court in the last few days to provide me with a copy of those recommendations, and rest assured, as soon as I have them, I'll provide them to you.
Next question we have is, having just lost the battle against euthanasia in Western Australia, what does the future look like for the pro-life cause in this state? Are things getting worse? Where are things currently at with the euthanasia legislation? What can we expect? Is there anything we can do in this current space we have before its implementation?
Yes, it was very sad to see that legislation passed. It is the most dangerous legislation in Australia. We know that the Victorian legislation was particularly bad, but unfortunately the Western Australian legislation is more dangerous than even the Victorian one. At the moment, where do things sit? The matters sit with the government who championed this cause to now implement the legislation. They said that it would take some 15 months, so we would expect that something will happen in the new year. To what extent does the coronavirus and the COVID-19 pandemic affect that implementation? We'll have to wait and see. I would have thought that there would be no case at the moment for the government to be spending any time implementing a regime to take the lives of Western Australians in circumstances where all of our health resources need to go towards saving lives and flattening the curve with respect to COVID-19. I should add that any questions that I've been asking in Parliament in recent times have usually been responded to by saying that the government is so busy with dealing with COVID-19 it doesn't have time to deal with other matters. So I'll be very disturbed to find that the government is continuing to prioritise the implementation of euthanasia in these circumstances.
So with plans to implement restrictions around people praying and offering sidewalk counselling services outside abortion centres currently underway, do you think that it is appropriate to refer to these areas of restriction as censorship zones? Why do you think there is a push to limit peaceful prayer and vigil outside abortion centres?
Yeah, look, I think that I understand why people might refer to this proposal as a censorship zone. After all, that is what it is. But in one sense, it's a negative way of looking at this proposed zone. I see these zones as save zones. The government talks about them being safe zones, which is, of course, a complete red herring. The reality is what happens in these proposed zones, which of course are areas close to abortion clinics, is that human lives are saved. Anyone in Western Australia who wants to walk into an abortion clinic is free to do so. They have the liberty to do so under Western Australian law, and the truth is there's no one in Western Australia stopping them from doing so, and that is right. They are entitled to, under the law, walk in there freely without any harassment, without any abuse, and that continues to be the case in Western Australia. No one yet has been able to demonstrate to me any police reports that indicate that there's been any harassment or abuse in Western Australia. That may well have happened in other jurisdictions, but not here. Hence, there's no case for this type of thing. What actually happens in these so-called zones is that lives are saved. And that's because those who want to be provided information in terms of other options and support are given that information, and that's a great thing, and that should continue.
And have you yourself ever been down to any of these abortion centres to bear witness?
So when this proposal first came up, I thought it would be important to do my own investigation, because I was concerned, as concerned as I am about lives being taken, I'm equally concerned about any Western Australian resident going about their lawful business unimpeded. Just as I believe that when the government develops roads and bridges and the like, they should be able to do that unimpeded by environmental protesters. I believe that a person going into a lawful premises should be able to do so freely. So unbeknownst to some of our pro-life movement who were attending before an abortion clinic, I observed their practice from a distance. They had no idea that I was there, and I was there with a staff member of mine. And we could see that it was the epitome of peaceful practice. We had quiet individuals who were there near the footpath, providing information in a peaceful fashion to anyone who wanted it. If somebody wanted a brochure, they took it. If they didn't, they didn't take it. And quite frankly, it was far more peaceful than what I see on polling booths every 4 years at a state election, where you have a vast amount of people there handing out how to vote cards. So if it's good enough to be within 6 metres of a polling booth and handing out a how to vote card, I see no reason why you can't be within 6 metres of an abortion clinic providing a brochure saying, would you like help and assistance?
Just a general one, when do you think we will actually see an end to abortion in Western Australia?
I think the only time that we will ever see that is when our culture has changed from a culture that thinks of support rather than termination. At the moment, we have a culture that thinks an unplanned pregnancy, the first reaction is terminate. But terminate what? Apart from the fact, of course, that there's a termination of a life, you're not going to terminate the sorrow, the grief, and the ongoing ramifications of that decision. That's where we are at as a culture in Western Australia at the moment. I would much rather that we shifted that to a culture of support that said, if you're involved in an unplanned pregnancy, we as a community will wrap our arms around you and we will journey this with you. When we get to that point, we might see the end of these laws. We really want to get to the point where it's unthinkable to have an abortion because there is so much support that's being provided for an unplanned pregnancy. That should be our aspiration.
Roe versus Wade in America looks like it's probably the weakest it's ever been. It might be overturned. What are they doing right in America that we can perhaps learn from in Western Australia?
Well, they've been dealing with this issue for a lot longer than us in Western Australia. We've been dealing with it for just over 20 years. So of course they've been persevering for a lot longer, and so therefore you've seen some generational change in terms of their attitudes to these issues. And hopefully the people in America are not just thinking about changing the law, but they're doing so concurrently with providing extra support to those in an unplanned pregnancy. The two things have to go hand in glove. There's no point of just changing the law without providing as much assistance as has ever been provided before. So if that's what's happening in America, I'm very pleased for them, and hopefully one day we could do the same here.
And one final one, on America still, the President was at the annual March for Life for the first time ever this year. If we do actually get to have the Rally for Life later on this year, what do you think the chances are that the Premier might address the crowds?
Look, obviously that's a matter for the current Premier. I would think that it is highly unlikely. But having said that, I'm not aware of other premiers having addressed the crowd either, so I don't want to be overly negative about the current Premier, least of all one who's not from my political party, because I believe this issue is beyond party politics. It shouldn't be dealt with in a partisan fashion. So I don't think that we will see the Premier, but in fairness to him, we haven't seen others either. But wouldn't it be a wonderful thing one day if we had a pro-life Premier?
What is the one virtue that you find most important in the pro-life battle? What is the one virtue you'd pray for to increase in those who fight for the unborn?
Without question, perseverance, because this is a very, very difficult fight to be involved in. It is one where certain segments in our community and in the media are very aggressive, and so in those circumstances you need to, of course you need to have courage, but you have to be willing to persevere. And it's going to take an ongoing period of time for us to be able to change the culture and to change the hearts and minds of members of Parliament to address this. So I think perseverance with courage are a close second.
Amidst all the sadness in the pro-life battle, what are some causes for joy in this fight?
Well, the things that I guess I'm most pleased about and most joyful about in the pro-life space is the work of places like Pregnancy Problem House and Pregnancy Assistance Office, because the reality is, irrespective of what the laws of Western Australia are, we need to be providing more support to organisations like that. I firmly believe that if every Western Australian young mother who is involved in an unplanned pregnancy was provided at least access to a conversation with a pregnancy problem house or a pregnancy assistance office, I think we'd have a minuscule number of abortions in Western Australia. But unfortunately, governments of various persuasions over the years have sought fit not to fund organisations like that. Governments are quite happy to provide funding, taxpayers' dollars towards abortion providers, but not to those who are willing to support a person through an unplanned pregnancy. So it's the work of those organisations who do that entirely on the back of donations and fundraising that impress me the most, particularly because these people are literally lifesavers.
What is the role of ordinary men and women in the pro-life cause?
Well, the first and most important thing that they can do is that they can provide assistance and support to the pregnancy support centres, whether that be Pregnancy Problem House, Pregnancy Assistance Office. If ordinary men and women can do that, they will be saving lives. The second thing that they can do is continue to advocate their views to their local members of Parliament. Every Western Australian has one lower house member of Parliament that represents them, and they have 6 in the upper house. So there's at least 7 people that every Western Australian is entitled to communicate to, and everybody can do that, whether that be by way of an email, a letter, a phone call, or even better, a face-to-face visit.
So every year that I've been in attendance at the Rally for Life, we've been handed pieces of paper, petitions that we've passed around and been asked to sign. What's the point of these petitions and what's happened to them over the last few years?
Yeah, look, it's a great question, Dylan. I think it's important for people to know that these petitions are highly valuable and they do create changes, albeit slow, sometimes tortoise-like speed reforms, but they do make a difference. Last year's Rally for Life, there was more than 6,000 signatures, I think 6,221 signatures on the petition, which was fantastic. I tabled that in February this year, and that petition is currently being considered by the Standing Committee on Environment and Public Affairs. I have put in my submission to support the petition. The Coalition for the Defence for Human Life, who are the principal petitioners, have also put in their submission, and we're now waiting to hear back from the committee about that inquiry. The petition is dealing with a very important issue to do with abortions after 20 weeks gestation, so what we call late-term abortions, post 20 weeks. And under the law of Western Australia, these type of abortions can only take place if a panel of doctors approve the termination. There are usually something like 70 of these per year, so more than one a week. very late term abortions. And in 2014, the then Health Minister, Kim Hames, he agreed with my recommendation that we need to have an annual report provided by the panellists, the panel of doctors, to justify, to keep an account of why they say that these late-term abortions are necessary. Sadly, in 2017, the now Health Minister, Roger Cook, decided to end those annual reports. He effectively issued an order to the Department of Health to say he doesn't want to see these reports anymore. And the purpose of this petition, where more than 6,000 Western Australians signed at the Rally for Life last year and thereafter, is to say to the government, this reporting process must be reinstated. So we're waiting to hear back from the committee. It's a fundamental issue of accountability. It's bad enough that there are late-term abortions happening in Western Australia. We know that they're happening because of conditions which are compatible with life. Down syndrome, spina bifida, dwarfism are some of the conditions that we know from previous investigations are being used as justifications for late-term abortions. Well, if they are going to make those type of decisions, there needs to be a report to justify that. That's only fair and reasonable in a first world democracy. For that to have been obliterated by the current Health Minister is disgraceful, and we do need that to be changed.
Well, thank you for your time, Nick. In the absence of the rally this year or its postponement due to COVID, we're really thankful for your time and for everything that you've continued to do for the pro-life cause.
It's my pleasure, Dylan, and thank you to you and the rest of those involved in today's production.